Hello guys, welcome back to the quantity surveying workshop and to another video. In today's video, we're going to be continuing our series for the measurement of a frame structure, as the substructure. So in our previous video, we taught how to measure the site clearance, site preparation, and the excavation of the column pit. Meanwhile, in today's video, we're going to be treating how to go about the measurement of the foundation trench excavation. So stay tuned and let's get right into the video. So in order to get the measurements for the foundation trench, you need to know that foundation trench excavation is measured in what? Meter cube. So we're going to be needing three things. We're going to be needing the total distance or the total center line of the trench. We're going to be needing the width of the trench, and we're going to be needing the depth of the trench. Now the width of the trench is already given as 675 mm. We do not know the total distance or the total perimeter of the trench, and we do not know the depth of the trench, so we are going to be finding those two things. So let's go to our workstation so that we can see the drawings of the foundation details. So if you can see this drawing, this is the details of our foundation trench. Now previously we've already calculated the total volume for our column pit. All these squares that you are seeing with BT as base type are our what? Column pit. So the next thing now we now need to determine is the total volume of excavation for the trench. Now you see this rectangle here intersecting the column pits. Those are the what? Trench. Those are the what? Trench. So we need to know what is the distance for each of the trench line. So for example, we need to know the distance from here to here, from here to here, from here to here, from here to here, and so on and so forth until we finish everything for the trench. So that is what we are going to be doing in our drawing right now. So in order to get the distance for this trench, what you need to look at is the dimension given to you in the drawing. Now, what kind of dimension are you seeing in this drawing? Yes, center to center dimension. So center to center dimension is what was used to dimension this drawing. So with this center to center dimension, we can use this to determine what is the distance for each of the trench. So since we know we are given our center to center dimension, the next thing you now need to know is the length and the width of the column pit. Now, as you can see, the center to center dimension starts from the center of the what? Column base or the column pit, whatever you call it. It starts from the what? Center. And you know that in the previous drawing, the details of our base type 2, this is the base type 2, is what? 1200 by what? 1200. And the column placing is at the what? Center. So if the column placing is at the intersection of the two center line, it means that this half is going to be what? 600. This other half is going to be 600. Similarly, the same thing for the what? Other side. So put that information in mind. So now that we're back here now, we know that this center line is intersecting the center or the midpoint of this column pit and that of the other column pit. So what we can do is this: we can get the dimension of this column pit from here to here. I hope you can see this. From here to here, that's the length of this column pit, as well as that of this column pit. So we know that the length of base type 2 is what? 1200. So if we divide it into 2, meaning the center point, here this half is going to be 600, this half is going to be 600. Similarly to base type 3. So as you can see, this is base type 3, right? Now base type 3, the orientation of base type 3 is not horizontal like this, it was facing vertically. meaning that this thing was turned the other way around, longitudinal, like this. So it means that this is what we are seeing in our drawing, this part, right? So now you can see where the column placement is, right? The column placement is at the midpoint of this 1200. You can see from here to here is given as what? 600. From here to here is given as what? 600. So we know that the center point of this column placement is 600 by what? 600. So we'll have that in mind. So now coming into the trench again, you will now, since we know that from here to here is half of the column pit for base type 2, and for here to here we know that from here to here is 1200. Half of that is going to give us 600. So since we know that from here to here is 600 and from here to here is 600, we can minus, that's 600 plus 600 is 1200. We can minus 1200 from 4008. It will give us the what? Length of our trench from here to what? Here. I hope that's easily understood. So if we do the maths, we know that the center to center dimension from here to here is 4008. We can now minus half of the length of base type 2 and half of the length of base type 3. It will give us our trench. So let's do that. 4008 minus what? 600 minus what? 600, and that is going to give us what? 2808. So it means that the dimension from here to here is what? 2800 and what? 8. So all we're going to be doing now is to what? Record it. So we've recorded the distance that we calculated as well, 2808. So we will now move to the next one. So let me just mark this like this so that we'll know that we've already catered for this one. So the next now one we're going to be doing is for this one. So if you look at the center to center dimension, we were given from this center point of base type 3 down to the edge of this column base. So what we need is the dimension from here to this end. So since we know that from here, that the center point to the edge of this column base is given as 3943, we can now minus half of this column base on just this side. Is going to give us the dimension from here to here. So since we know that the dimension from here to here is given as was 3943, we can now minus this part, which we know that is half of the length of this column base type 3. So half of that length, which was 1200, will give us what? 600. So we'll now minus 600 from 3943, and that will give us what? 3343. Now mind you, if you look at this point and this point, they are similar, because see where the center line is passing. It is passing like this down to the center of this column base, and see where this dimension is at the edge down to this edge. So it means that the same thing we've calculated here is the same thing that we've calculated here. So we can do this by 2. So whatever we have here, which is 3343, that we have here, is the same thing that we would have here. I hope that's easily understood. So then we're not going to what? Record it. So we know that we've calculated 3343 in both sides. That's for 2 places. So you can either do 3243 multiplied by 2, or you can just do it like this by writing them in 2. So now the next one we're going to be dealing now is this part here, this trench. So we know that from the edge of this column base type 3 down to the center line of base type 2 is given as what? 4033. So we want to determine what is the length from the edge of this trench here down to this what edge. But if you look at the dimension, we're given from this edge down to the what center line. So we can now minus this half from the total dimension here to give us the what dimension for this trench. So since we know that the length for BT2 is 1200, half of 1200 will give me was 600. So we minus 600 from this dimension, and whatever we have is the dimension for this trench. So we can now do the math. 4033 minus what 600 will give me what 3433. So it means that from here to here is what 3433. So if you look at what we have here, it is the same thing as what we have here that we've calculated, because if you look at the dimension line from this edge, it is also aligning at this edge, and from this center line it is also aligning at the center line of this column placing. So if we minus this 600 from here, the 3433 that we had as the dimension for this trench is the same thing that we will get when we minus from this center line here down to the edge of this what column footing. So we can now do the same thing that we did in the other part by multiplying what we have here, that's the center line, by 2 to cater for this trench and what this trench. So we got 3433 for one. So we're going to be what booking. So we have what catered for this trench and what this trench. I hope you are getting what we are doing here. So the next part we are going to be catering for is this trench here. So if you look at this, let's look for where the dimension is given. Okay, so the dimension from here, that's the center line here, to this center line here, this is what is given. That's from here to here. If you can trace this line, this D, you can trace it down to the center line of this what trench. So this is the trench we're looking at. So this center line going down, this is the dimension from here to here. So if you want to get the total dimension for the center to center from this column placement to this column placement, all we need to do now is to add this dimension, and this dimension together. So if we add 4033 plus 560 plus 637 rather, it's going to give me what 5230. So it means that the center to center dimension from the center of this column placement to that of this column placement is what 5230. But that is not what we're looking for. We're looking for the what dimension of the what trench from the edges of the what column pit. So what we can now do is this. What is the length of base type 1? It was given as what 1200, and the same applies to our base type 2. Base type 2 was given as what 1200 in the drawing. So we now need to determine half of the two of them. When we determine half, we can now minus it from what the center to center dimension from the column points, which we just calculated as 5230. So half of 1200 for base type 1 is 600. Half of that of base type 2 is 600. So we're going to be minusing 600 on both sides from 5230. So 5230 minus what 600 minus 600 will give me what 4030. So it means that the dimension from here to here is what 4030. So we'll now what book. $4,030. So we have measured for what this part. So the next part we are going to be measuring for is this trench here at the staircase area for this trench. And how do we do that? You know that we've been given the dimension from this point, that the center point of the column pit here, down to this point. here, if you trace this column pit, this midpoint of this column pit from here down, you can see this is the marking. And if you can trace from here down, you can see this is the marking. So from here to here is given as what? 3,943, meaning that the center to center dimension from this column point here in the middle down to the column point here in the middle is given as what? 3,943. So all we just need to do now is to minus half of the length of this base type 1 and half of the length of this what? Base type 1 from 3,943 is going to give us the what? The distance of this what? Trench. So 3,943 minus what? This half, which is what? 600, minus this other half, which is what? 600. That will give us what? 2,743. So it means that from here to here is what? 2,743. So we are going to what? Book. So we have what? Scattered for this part. So the next one we're going to be capturing for is this part, this trench here. So similarly, you know that if you trace this line here down to this place, this is the marking. And similarly, if you trace from this trench, from this column point down to here, this is the marking. So from this midpoint to this midpoint is giving us what? 4,008. So it means that if we minus half of this trench for base type 2, the length for base type 2 is 1,200, so half of it is 600. Similarly, the length for base type 1 is 1,200, half of it is 600. So if you minus 600 from both base type 2 and base type 1 from 4,008 is going to give us what? The distance for this trench. But if you don't want to follow this thing, you can see that the same distance for this trench here is the same distance for this what? Trench. What we calculated for this trench was 2,808. You will see that when I do the math here, it's going to give us the same thing. So we know that from here to here is 4,008. So 4,008 minus what? 600 for half of what? Base type 2, and then 600 for half of base type 1 is going to give me what? 2,808. So you see that it is the same thing as what we what? Have here. So we are now going to what? Record 2,808. So we measured for this part. So the next thing we're going to be measuring for would be this part down here. So you see, I'm trying to do all the horizontals first before we move towards the verticals. So we're going to do this trench here. So if you trace this midpoint for this column placement here down, you can see this is the marking. Similarly, the midpoint for this column placement here, you can see this is the marking. So the dimension from this midpoint to this midpoint is what? 4,033. I hope you can see that 4,033. So in order to get the distance from the edge of this trench to this edge, we just need to minus half of the column base for base type 5 and that of the column, and half of the column base for what? Base type what? 2. The length for base type 5 is given as what? 1,400. If you can see, 1,400 by what? 1,400. And that of base type 2 is what? 1,200 by 1,200. So what we can now do is that we will minus half of the length of base type 5, which will give us what? 1,400 divided by 2 will give me 700. So half will be what? 700. Similarly, for this part here, half of 1,200 will be what? 600. So we can now minus what? 700 from here and what? 600 from here. It's going to give us what the dimension from here to here. So 4033 minus 700, which is what the half of what base type 5, and then minus the half of base type 2, which is what 600. That will give me what 2733. So it means that the dimension from here to here is 2733. So we can now what book. So I hope you can guess that. So we've booked for what? This point. So the next point we can now book for is this point here. So I'm trying to do the easy ones before we can get to the more complicated ones. So let's work on this one. So similarly, we know that from this midpoint here down to this midpoint here is given as what 4008. So if we minus half of the length of base type 4 and that of the length of base type 1, we are going to get the dimension from here to here. So what is the length of base type 4? The length of base type 4 is 1200 and that of base type 1 is 1200. So half of it will be 6600 each. So we can now minus this half and this half to get this strength. So 4008 minus what 600 for this half and minus 600 for this half is going to give me what 2800 and what 8. The same thing that we've gotten here and what here. So we will now what record it 2808. So the next one we're going to be looking at is this point here. So if you look at this trench here, in between it is base type 5 and another base type 5, and we just said that the length for base type 5 is what 1400. That's from here to here is 14. From here to here is what 1400. So half of 1400 is what 700 here, 700 here. Similarly, the same thing from here to here is 700 here, 700 here. So what we need to now do is what determine the dimension from this center line down to this what center line. So we are given from here to here as what 3943, from here to here as 637, and from here to here as what 560. So if we add these three dimensions together, we're going to have the total distance from this center line down to this center line. So 3943 plus 637 plus 560 is going to give us 5140. So the dimension from here to this center line is what 5140. So we can now minus half of the column basis to get the distance for our what trench. So half of 1400 you know is 700. So we can now minus 700 from here and minus 700 from here, and that will give us what 3740. So the distance from this side of the trench to the other side of the trench is what 3740. So we'll now what record 740. So we booked for this part. So now for the horizontals that are left, we have this trench here, we have this trench here, we have this trench here, and we have what this trench here. You can see this one is an irregular shape. It is not a complete rectangle. In between it is what this column base. So this is the last one we're going to be doing because we are going to do some deductions here. So let's go to this part. So now you can see that there's an intersection between this vertical trench here and this horizontal trench that we're looking for. So all you just need to do is this: get your pencil, right? We are going to be cutting this trench like this. I hope you can understand that we're going to be cutting this trench like this. So since we're cutting this trench like this, what we want to determine is just this part, just this length from here to here. So what we can now do is this: we need to determine what the center line from here, from this column point down to this what column point, and which we've already calculated as what 5,140. We mean that the dimension from here to here is 5,140. So in between it we have base type 5 and what base type 1. So base type 5 is what the length is 1,400. Base type 1, the length is what 1,200. So we're going to be minusing half of base type 5 and half of what base type 1. So half of base type 1, you know the length is 1,200, so half is what 600. So we're going to be minusing 600, and then we're going to be minusing half of the length of base type 5. So half of 1,400 will give me what 700. So minus 700, so that will give us what 3,840. So from here to this point is what 3,840. So we've measured from this one. So what we need to do is what record 3,840. So the next one we're going to be looking for is this point here. You can see that this point is the intersection between this vertical trench and this horizontal trench. So what we're going to be doing is this: use your pencil and then cut off, just demarcate it, the vertical from the horizontal. So it means that this is the section that we are looking for horizontally. So we need to determine the distance from here to this point. I hope you are getting me. We need to determine the distance from here to this point. And how can we do that? We need to, you can see that this center line here goes across this trench down to this point, right? So what we can do is this: this is the center line that we need here at C, and similarly this is the center line we need at what D. So the distance between C and D is what 3,943. So now you know that at this edge we have the width of the trench, and at this edge we have the width or the length of the what column base type 2. So now, in order to get the distance for this trench, since we know the center to center dimension from here to this what end, that's from this point to this point, so this is the center line you are seeing here. So all we can do now is to minus this distance from this center line to the tip or to the edge of this trench, and then minus the distance from this center line to the edge of base type 2. So you know that the length of base type 2 is what 1,200. So half of it will be what 600. Similarly, we need to determine what is the width of the what trench. Now if you look at this, we have a section here through AA at the trench, and this is the section here. So if you zoom closer, you can see that this dimension for the trench from here to here is what 675. So it means that the dimension for this width from here to here is 675, but that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for half, because the orientation for what C is at the what middle of the trench. So half of 675 is going to give me what 337.5. So you know that the dimension from this midpoint down to the edge of the trench is what 337.5. So you can minus that half from we can minus this half and half of the length of this base type 2 from the distance of this midpoint, which is 3,943, to get the distance of our what? Trench. So let's do that. 3,943, which is the distance from this midpoint to this midpoint, minus this half, then minus this half, that's the half of the length of base type 2, which is what? 600, and that will give me what? 3005.5. So the distance from this trench, from this edge of the trench to this edge of the trench, is what? 3005.5. So we'll now what? Record it. So we've measured forward this point. So we have 2 more horizontal trenches left. That is this trench here. Let me demarcate it. Let me put this line. This rectangle here for this trench, and this other irregular trench here. I hope you can guess that. So we're going to be starting with this easy one, which is this point. So it is similar to the trench that we just did previously before this one. So you can see, if you look at this midpoint here at A, you see this midpoint at call out A, you can see that the distance from here to here, this midpoint is call out C. So you can see the distance between call out A and C is given as what? 4,008, meaning that from this midpoint to this midpoint is 4,008. So we're now going to be minusing half of the length of base type 1 and half of the width of what? The trench, in order to get the distance from here to what? Here. So we know that the distance from call out A and C is what? 4,008. We will now minus half of the width of our trench, which is what? 675 divided by 2, and then we will now minus half of the length of base type 1, half of the length of base type 1. So base type 1, the length is 1,200, so I'm not going to be dividing it by 2, so half will be 600, so minus 600. So the distance for this trench here to here is what? 3,070.5. So we're not going to be what? Recording it. So we're now going to work on the last trench, which is this one. So if I draw this line like this to demarcate the horizontal part from the vertical part, what can you see? You can see that this is not a regular rectangle. The trench for base type 1 that we've already measured in our column pit excavation is intersecting the trench is intersecting this foundation trench here. I hope you can see that. You can see that if you draw the rectangle, you can see this small part here. Hope you can see this small part here is the intersection. So what we can do now is this. If we trace our midpoint here, because this is the trench we are looking for, you can see this midpoint is passing through call out A, and similarly this midpoint here is passing through call out C. So the distance between A and C is what? 4,008. So what we can do is this. We can minus half of the width of the trench, that's 675 divided by 2. What we have is what? The distance from here to here. Then if we look at this, what we can do is, we want to do this in such a way that we make the trench a regular rectangle and then minus this extra that has already been catered for in when we're measuring our column pit excavation. So what we can now do is this. The distance of the trench we're going to be needing is the distance from this edge down to this edge. So since we know that call out C is at this midpoint, we can now minus half of the width of this trench to get us to this point. I hope that's easily understood. If you don't understand this, please rewind back and listen again so that you can get it. So we know that the midpoint from here to here is 4008, meaning that from this midpoint to this midpoint 4008. So we're going to be minusing half of the width of this trench and half of the width of this trench, and that to get the distance from here towards here. So what we can now do is this: 4008 minus half of the trench on both sides will give me the full length of the trench, which is 675. So it means that the dimension from here to here is 3,333. So the length from here to here 3,333. So we're not going to book. So this extra now that we have here, that has already been catered for when we were excavating for our column base, when we get our total volume for the trench, we are not going to be deducting that extra because it has already been catered for in another item. If you don't remove it, we have over measured. I hope you understand. So now doing this, do we still have any horizontal trench left? No. We've already worked on all the horizontal trench. So what is left now are the vertical trench. So what we'll just do now is to add all these parameters together in order to get the total distance for our horizontal trench. So after adding everything together for the horizontal trench, what we had is 45,129. So this is the length of all our horizontal trench. So the next one we're going to be doing is for the verticals. So the next thing now is to determine the distances for our trench, being the vertical ones. We've already done the horizontal, so next is the vertical. So we're going to be starting with these two. I can see that they are similar. Base type 2, base type 2, base type 2, base type 2. So we can start from them. So we know that the distance from this point, call out 1, down to this point here. You know that we have from here to here is 1096, and from here to here is 944. So if you add the two of them together, 944 plus 196 is equal to 2040. Sorry. So we're not going to be minusing half of this length of base type 2 and that of this length of base type 2 from both sides. So minus 600 from here, minus 600 from here, and that will give us 840. So it means that the distance from here to here is 840. So you can see that what we have here is the same thing as what we have here. So we can now multiply this distance by 2 because it is exactly the same distance here. So we can now record. For the verticals, we will now say 840, 840. So we've done for this part. So the next one we're going to work on will be for these two, because I can see that they are similar. So what I can now do is this: I can get the call outs to determine the distance from this midpoint down to this midpoint here, then minus half of the length or the width of base type 1 and the distance from here to here, which is what, 600. So now to determine the distance from call out 2 to call out 3 prime here, all we need to do now is to add this distance. 944 plus 2545 plus 452, and that's giving what, 3941. So it means that from this midpoint here to this midpoint here, we have 3941. So we're going to be minusing half of the length of the width, or the length rather, anyone you choose, because they are equal, 1200 by 1200. So if we divide 1200 by 2, we're going to get 600. So we're going to minus 600 from here and 600 from what, here. So minus 600 minus 600, we're going to have what, 2741. So it means that the distance from here to here is 2741. So you can see that what we have here is the same as what we have here. So we can now multiply it by what, 2, and record. So I'll now record it, 2741, 2741. So we're done with this two. So the next one we're going to be working on now is this part here. So now we know that from this call out here down to this midpoint, call out 3 prime, we have what, 2 dimensions. That's 2545 and what, 452. So we'll add the two of them together to know the total distance. So 2545 plus 452 give me 2997. So the distance from this call out to call out 3 prime is what, 2997. So we're not going to be minusing half of the length of base type 2 and half of the length from base type 2 from this part. So 1200 divided by 2 is 600. So we're going to be minusing 600 from the two sides. So 2997 minus 600 from one side minus 600 from the other side will give me what, 1797. So we're going to what, book. So we have worked on this part. So the next one we're going to be looking at is this vertical trench here. So if we take from this call out here down to call out 4, we can get the distance from here to here. So if you can see, from that distance we have 3 dimensions. That's this dimension here, this dimension, and this dimension. So we'll add it together to get the total length from that call out to call out 4. So 2545 plus 452 plus 1543. That's going to give me what, 4540. So the distance from here to here is 4540. So I'm not going to be minusing half of the length of base type 2 and half of the length from this base type 2. So half of it will be 600. So 600 from both sides. When you minus it, we're going to be having what, 3340. So the distance from here to here is 3340. So we're not going to what, record. So we have measures for this part. So the next vertical trench now we're going to be working on is this small little one here and this one. As you can see, they are similar. So why do I say so? Because if you look at call out 3 prime, it is in between here, here, and here. Similarly, call out 4, you can see it is passing through that point. So we know that the distance from this midpoint to this midpoint is what, 1543. Similarly, the same thing here, from this midpoint to this midpoint, 1543. So what we can do now is, since we know from here to here is 1543, we can now minus half of base type 1 from both sides. So we know that the dimension for base type 1 is 1 2 by 1 2. So we can now minus half from both sides from 1543. So 1543 minus 600 will give me 343. So it means that the dimension from here to here is 343. So it is the same thing as this one. So we're now going to book. So we have worked on these two. So the next vertical one we're going to be working on now is this part here. So at call out 4 down to this call out here, we need to find what's the distance. So we're not going to be adding this and this together. So 2075 plus 2484 plus 768 is going to give me 5327. It means that from this call out 4 down to this call out here is going to give us 5327. So we're going to be minusing the half of the length of the base type 4 here. So we know that from here to here is 600 in our detailing. As you can see here, from here to here is 600. So we will now minus it from here. We will now minus half of the length of base type 2, which will also be 600. So from that dimension we've calculated as 5327, now minus 600 from the both sides, we are now going to get 4127. So the dimension from here to here is 4127. So we are now going to record it. So the next one we're going to work on now would be this small one here, this part here. So we know that the call out from 4 down to this part here, this midpoint, is 2075. So we're now going to be minusing half of base type 1 from both sides. So half of base type 1, half of the length of base type 1 is 600. So by 2 will be 1200. So we'll minus 1200 from this 2075. That's 875. So the distance from here to here is 875. So we'll record. So the next one we're going to be measuring is this trench here. So you see that this trench here and this trench here are similar. So we're going to be doing them together. So what can we now do? See, from this call out here, call out 4 down to call out 5, we need to determine what the dimension is. So we have to add these two dimensions together. So 2075, which is this one from here to here, plus from here to here, which is 2484, will give me 4559. So we're not going to be minusing half of the length of base type 2 from both sides. That's half of here, half of here. So when we minus it, that's 600 by 2, we're going to be having 3359. So we'll now record it. So it means here is 3359, here is 3359. So we've done for these two. So the next one we're going to be booking for now is this one here. I hope you can see it, this one here. So now to do that, we need to determine what is the dimension from this call out to this call out. So we can see that we have 3 dimensions within that call out. That's this, and this. So if you add these three together, we're going to get the dimension from here to here. That's the dimension from here, this midpoint, to this midpoint. So we will now say 2,484, which is this one, plus this one, 768, plus this one, 1,178, is equal to what? 4,430. So it means that 4,430 is the distance from here to here, from here to here. So we'll now minus half of the length of base type 1 and half of the length of base type 2. So 4,430 minus 600 will give me what? 3,230. Remember the dimension for this trench here is 3,230. So we'll now record it. So we're done for this part. The next part we're going to be doing is what? This part here, this vertical trench here. So now this vertical trench, in order to get this vertical trench, you will trace this midpoint here to call out 5, and then you will trace from this midpoint here down to call out 6. So in between call out 5 and 6, we need to get the distance. So we are given two dimensions here, from here to here and from here to here. So we'll now add the 12 of them together. So when you add the 12 of them together, 768 plus 1,178 is what? 1,946. So we're now going to be minusing half of the length of base type 2 and half of the length of, or half of the width of our trench rather. So we will now say, since we know that the length of base type 2 is 1,200, half will be what? 600. So we'll minus that half, and then we know that the width of our trench here is 675. So when we divide it by 2, we'll now minus what we have. So we're going to be having what? 1,008.5. So the distance from this trench from here to here is 1,008.5. So let's record it. So we have done this one. So the next vertical trench we are going to be working on is for this part here. So how do we do that? We need to get the distance from collars 5 and 6. So you know that within this collars 5 and 6 we have two dimensions, 768 and 1,178. So we'll add it together. 1,178 plus 768 is equal to what? 1,946. So it means that the distance from collars 5 and 6 is 1,946. So we'll now minus half of the length of base type 2 from both sides. So that's minus 600 minus 600. We're going to be having 746. So it means that the dimension from here to here is 746. So we'll now record it. So we've measured for this vertical trench. So what we are left now, we are left with what? Two trenches, which is this trench and what? This trench. So the last two trenches left will be this trench here and this trench here. So let's start with what? This trench. So what we can now do is this. We need to know what is the distance from collar 6 to collar 7, and it's given to us as what? 1,920. So we have to minus half of the length of base type 1 and half of the length of what? Base type 5. You know that the length of base type 1 is 1,200 and that of base type 5 is 1,400. So since we know that the distance from 6 to 7 is 1,920, so 1,920 minus half of the length of base type 1, which is 600, minus half of the length of base type 5, which is what, 700. That's going to be what, 620. It means that the distance from this side of the trench to this side of the trench is what, 620. So we'll now what, record it. So we have worked on this one. So the next one now will be this last vertical trench. So we know that it is within the, if you look at the distance from here, this midpoint to this midpoint, it is within column 6 and 7, and we know the distance for column 6 and 7 is 1920. So all we need to do now is to minus half of the length of base type 5 from both sides, because it is within it has two base type 5. So we'll now minus half from here and half from here. So 1920 minus what, half of base type 5 from both sides. So 700 minus 700, what we're having is what, 520. You know that the distance from here to here is what, 520. So now what, record it. So doing that, we've measured for all the vertical trenches in this drawing. So all we just need to do now is to get the summation of everything. So if you add all the verticals together, we're going to be having what, 30,829.5. So we'll now record it. 829.5. So with these, we've measured the center line for our what, foundation trench excavation. So the next thing we need to deduce is we need to get the total of the horizontal, or the summation of the horizontal and vertical together. So we can now see that summary horizontal, we got what, 45,129 millimeters, and then for the vertical we got what, 30,829.5. So when you add the two of them together, you are going to be having what, 75,958.5 millimeters. So this is the total distance for our what, trench, which includes both the horizontal and verticals. So the next thing now we now need to deduce is the depth of our what, foundation trench. So sometimes the depth of the column pit excavation is deeper than that of the foundation trench excavation. So we now need, sometimes they are equal, sometimes the column pit is deeper. So we now need to know whether that of the column pit is deeper than that of the what, trench. So how do we do that? We are going to be using the section through AA in order to determine what is the depth of our what, foundation trench. So if you look at this drawing, this is the section through AA. So I hope you can see it. Now you can see that it is similar to what we did when we were determining the depth of the column pit excavation. If you haven't watched that video, please, I will advise you go and watch the video. So we're going to be using the same approach. So we know that the distance from the top of the oversized concrete down to the top of the foundation footing is what, 1,350. The thickness of the footing is what, 225, and there's a blending of what, 50 mm. So if we add everything together, we're going to be having what, 1,625 mm. So that is the distance from the top of the oversized concrete to the bottom of the what, blinding. But we need to determine where our stripped level is, so that we can now know what is the actual depth of our what, excavation. And in that video, when we checked our sectional drawing, we stated that from the top of the oversized concrete down to the street level was what, 600 millimeters. So what we'll just do now is we're going to be minusing 600 millimeters from the total distance from the top of this oversight down to the bottom of the blinding. Whatever we have is going to give us the actual depth of our foundation trench. So since the distance from here down to the bottom of the blinding is 1625 as we've calculated, we will now minus that 600, which is 1025. So it means that the depth of our foundation trench is 1025. So it means that our column pit excavation is deeper than our foundation trench excavation, because our column pit excavation gave us the depth of our column pit excavation was 1150, and now the depth of our trench is 1025. So we can now do the math in our taking off sheet. So in order to get the depth of our excavation, like I said, we have to add those parameters together from the top of the oversize down to the bottom of the blinding. So from the top of the oversized concrete to the top of the foundation footing was 1350. 1350. We're now going to add the thickness of the foundation footing, which is 225. Then we'll now add the 50 mm blinding. So when you add 1350 plus 225 plus 50, you are going to have 1625. 1625. So this is the distance from the top of the oversight down to the bottom of the blinding. So we'll now have to minus that distance from the top of the oversight down to our strip level. So in our drawing, it was given as 600 mm. So if you look at this drawing, you can see from this point here to this point here is given as 600 mm, and our excavation is not starting from the oversight, it is starting from the strip level. That is why we have to minus this 600 mm. So minus, we'll now less 600, and that will be equals to 1025. So this is the depth of our excavation for the foundation trench. So if you listen closely, we said that the width of the foundation trench in that section through AA was 675. So now we know that the distance for the trench, both the horizontal and the vertical, was 75,958.5. We know the depth of our excavation as 1025, and we know the width of the foundation trench as 675. So we can now describe foundation trench excavation not exceeding 2.0 meters deep. So this is our description. So with this we can now put in our measurements. So the center line, or the length, or the total length of our trench was we calculated it as 75,958.5. So if you divide that by 1000, we're going to be having 75.958, which is approximately 76. So the distance for the trench would be 76.00. Then the width of our trench is 675. So when you divide that by 1000, you're going to be having 0.68. And then the depth of our trench is 1.025, which is 1.03. So when you do your maths by multiplying these three parameters together, 76 times 0.68 times 1.03 is equal to what? 53.23. So this is what the total volume will be excavating for our what? Foundation trench. So since we've gotten the total volume for our foundation trench excavation as 53.23, the next thing we're going to now do is to deduct that excess that we talked about. Now, as you can see in this drawing, this is the excess here. You know that we calculated this trench to be like this, and you can see we calculated the trench like this whole rectangle, and you can see that there's an intersection between the trench and that of the column pit. So we have to remove this excess here, the volume of this excess. So what we are going to be needing now, we need to determine the length from here to here, as well as the width from here to here. Then we can now multiply that by our what? Depth of the what? Foundation trench. So how do I get the length from here to here? Now if you look closely, from here to here is the combination of the thickness of this blockwork and half of the spread here. So you know that in order to get the width of our foundation trench, you will first find the thickness of the blockwork and then add twice spread. So and the twice spread is like saying the thickness of our blockwork times 2. So since we know that this is 225 mm blockwork, so this spread here will be 225, this spread here will be what? 225. So it means that the length from here to here will be what? About 225 mm thickness and one of the 225 mm spread. So 225 plus 225 is going to give me what? 450. So it means that from here to here is 450. Similarly, we need to determine what is the width from here to here. So how do we do that now? We can say, okay, since we know the length of this column base type 1 as 1200 and we know the width of this trench is given as 675, so what we can do is this: we can minus 675 from the 1200. Whatever we have, we divide it by 2 to get this place and this place, but all we just need is this place. So 1200 minus 675 is giving me what? 525. So if I divide that by 2, I'm going to be having what? 262.5. So it means that from here to here is 262.5, and from here to here is 262.5. So we've gotten our length and we've gotten our width. So all we just need now is to get our what? Depth. And the depth of our trench we calculated before is what? 1025. So now we're now going to be deducting that volume, since we've gotten our length, our width, and our depth for this small area. So we'll now deduct excess, which is giving us what? 450, that's 0.45. That's the length. The width is what? 262.5, which is what? 0.26, and then by our depth, which is 1025, which is 1.03. When you multiply everything together, you're going to be having what? 0.12. So if I minus this from this, what are we going to be having? We're going to be having what? 53.11. So this is the actual volume of our what? Foundation trench. So doing this, we've measured for the foundation trench excavation. So we've come to the end of today's video, guys. I hope you derived adequate knowledge from this video. Please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel because it helps the channel grow. In our next video for this series, we are going to be treating how to measure for the leveling and compaction and the anti-termite treatment. So stay tuned. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next.